All right.
All right.
So,
Yeah, this week we are talking about the fourth letter, the E in core. So, and what we really want to get to this week is we want to talk about the fact that people can have an immediate experience of God. And the verse that he really brings out here is ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be open to you. That's Matthew 7:7. Right? And what he's really getting at here is that it, as you go through the first three chapters and the first three arguments for God's existence, people may still have doubts, right? I mean, we'd kind of be lying to ourselves if we didn't say, yeah, I have my doubts here and there, right? But what he's getting at is this can be utilized as that, hey, now that you know this evidence exists for who God is, ask him. Ask him if he's real. He will tell you. And then you will be able to have an immediate and personal experience of God. He says, such an experience further testifies to, and for the individual who experiences him, makes certain his existence. Right? I know God exists because I've had a personal experience with him, right? Just the same as everybody else who has had that personal experience with God. And the little core moment that he gives here, it says, this one's easy. We'll talk about some interesting and important things, but E is just about an invitation to experience God right now, as countless other people have done. This is important as we prepare to begin looking at Jesus in the next chapter, right? So understanding that we can have this experience is it's really important when we start looking at, okay, well, can we have a false experience of God and a real experience of God? What's the difference between the two? And Jesus is the answer to that difference between the two, right? So now throughout history, there's been this prevalence of theistic experiences, right? People know, people have always had this belief in God. Right? Throughout history of the world, the vast majority of humans have believed in the existence of a God or gods. One's hard pressed to locate a community who do not have some sort of theistic belief, whether monotheistic or polytheistic. What makes this more interesting is that even those tribes and cultures wherein polytheistic beliefs are prevalent, closer investigation almost always reveals that they too are actually monotheistic in a certain extent, right? So if you look at your Parthenon or Roman gods, they had their head god, the same with the Greek gods, right? So it was really one god and a bunch of demigods. Um, Now, in this chapter, the material is a little different. Instead of this unbeatable argument for God's existence, um, in this, we're kind of talking about the claims of experiences of God, just to show that it is not unreasonable to remain open to such an experience. The vast majority of people of the world throughout history think they've experienced God, then it seems silly to not to remain open-minded to such an experience. Right? So as we narrow our gaze even further, it's common for atheists to point out that even amongst the dominant monotheistic religions of the world, there's a great difference of belief. So there's a great difference between the beliefs of the Christians, the beliefs of the Jews, and the beliefs of the Muslims. Right? Um, our creators are very different. Uh, as as Christians, we do not believe that the God described by Islam exists, um, and we don't believe that the God of the Jews can be reached without Jesus. However, the God of Abraham is the one true God, according to all three of the monotheistic religions. Um, so, naturally, one is going to be skeptical in uh, one may be skeptical as whether anyone has actually made contact with this seemingly elusive being, but those people would be in the minority. Now, that's not to say that the majority has never been wrong. As a matter of fact, to say that, oh, well, all these people say it's true, so thus it must be true. We're going to get into that. That's a fallacy called ad populum, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. Now, this has been framed by people with an analogy in the past, right? So if 99 people in a village say they met a particular man, we'll call him Q, and another individual, person S, claims that person Q does not exist, which is more likely to be true? Right? Do we believe that the 99 villagers are wrong about the existence of person Q, or is it more reasonable to assume that S is mistaken? Right? So S then needs to have, he might demand that person Q does not exist because he's never seen him, heard his voice, or met him at all. Right? Now, if we were talking about a person and we were saying, oh, well, I've never seen him, thus he doesn't exist, that doesn't make any sense. And we can just kind of see that. And that's what this is really getting at, is, somebody who says, well, I don't see the evidence for him. Does that mean that God doesn't exist? And we understand that the answer to that is no, right? We need to, if 99 people claim to have met person Q and could tell powerful stories of experiences they'd had with him, then it stands to reason that person S is merely overly skeptical, right? Now, there have been multitudes of people throughout human history who believed that they had experienced God. If only one of them was correct, then he does exist, right? If even out of all of the different ways that people have said, hey, I've seen God, or I've heard from God, if only one of the people who's ever claimed to know God is correct, then God does exist, right? Same can be said of those who feel they have personally come to know Jesus Christ, right? Now, conversely, it's not true that if only one of them is wrong, then God does not exist, right? If one is wrong, then God still exists, right? So if polytheism of the Nordic people were wrong, God still exists. That doesn't say that God doesn't exist. It says that Thor doesn't exist. It does not say that Yahweh, Jehovah God, does not exist. So, and then he says, okay, now instead of a village, let's consider the island of Nassau in the Bahamas. Imagine a situation wherein people claimed that Nassau didn't exist, right? It's a decent sized island down in the Bahamas. I've seen it. I've never been there, but I've seen it. However, even though there are people who say that Nassau doesn't exist, there are millions of people who claim to have set foot on Nassau, right? But they were mistaken. Maybe they had been to other islands that they mistook for Nassau. One man, though, had indeed been to the actual island of Nassau, and he declared it to the world. He would be among the large number of people who claim to have walked the beaches of the place. But as long as he is correct, then Nassau's existence is sure. Right? Even if all the other Nassau believers were wrong and they hadn't actually been on Nassau, they'd been on the Grand Bahama Island or something, right? This guy having been there would mean that it's true, would mean that it's certain. So atheists, they like to say, oh, well, you're an atheist to all the other gods except one. You believe in one more God than I do. So there's a guy named John McCrae. He's got a channel called What Do You Meme? He goes after this and he says that's really not how this works, right? We're not an atheist. Atheist means no God, without God, right? That's what atheos, without God. He he makes fun of it, and he says, you know, he does like little skits sometimes. So then this skit, he's talking and he says, you know, he's talking to himself, but he's playing two characters. He says, you know, we're all murderers in a sense. You know, I just you've killed one less person than me. Well, no, I haven't killed anybody. So that's the same way they're trying to use it, right? Is they're saying, oh, well, you're an atheist too. You believe in one more God than I do. Well, that's how definitions work, is what he's getting at, right? They say the only difference between a Christian and genuine atheist is that the atheist believes in one less God than the Christian does. That doesn't work. And then he says, statements like this make great bumper sticker sermons for atheists, but they represent an argument that is truly flawed. The point that the atheist is trying to make is that there are so many religions in the world making conflicting claims about the creator that they must all be false. But that doesn't work either, right? But surely this does not follow. Just because there are many false religions does not mean that there is not a single valid one. As with the case of Nassau, there may be individuals who are genuinely but incorrectly believe that they have been to the island, but we would never say that therefore no one has ever been to the island. Instead, it's likely that if there are billions of people who claim to have experienced God but are incorrect in how they describe him, that he does exist. Some of these people are just misinterpreting their experiences of him. Right? Some of the people who claim to know who God is are misinterpreting their experience. That doesn't mean that God doesn't exist, right? That just means that, hey, they're mistaken. So as Christians, we maintain that God reveals himself to all genuine seekers of truth, right? Thus, it is reasonable to assume that many Christians and non-Christians have had real experiences with the one true God. The problem, as a Christian understands, is that many non-Christians are misled by existing religions of their own cultures and human sin. Nevertheless, testimony of the world is that God exists. So now he's going to issue a little challenge, and he says, as you continue through the material in subsequent chapters, open your mind up to the God whose existence has been demonstrated thus far. Ask him to make the remaining facts, FACTS, open and digestible for you. Struggle to remain open to his response. Genuine seekers have often reported that God has met this earnest endeavor with affirmation. And then as we're getting ready to go through the objections, he says these objections can get kind of technical. If you're a beginner, it might be a good idea just to focus on the actual evidence we've covered, right? You can always come back for objections once you've grown in your understanding a little more. If you think you're ready to keep reading, just don't get discouraged if it's tough at first, right? So the next thing is, doesn't this amount to taking it on faith without evidence, right? So what they're trying to say is your experience doesn't count as evidence for them, and thus it's not evidence at all. However, you know, the way I read 1 Peter 3:15, it says, be prepared to give a defense for the hope that is in you. This is kind of what we're talking about, is that experience you have with who God is, right? What some skeptic wants to say about a point like this is that when believers bring up their own personal experiences, they're just appealing to faith. And there is no way that one can know for sure whether or not a person's own experience is real or not. Right? That's what he pointed out in the beginning, right? This does not amount to an argument or proof of God's existence. It can solidify the stuff that we know, right? It solidifies the other three chapters for us because we have had this experience with God, right? And he says the previous three chapters accomplish this objective. E is an invitation to seekers of truth to have an immediate and personal experience of God themselves. So second, while I'm forthright that this does not amount to an argument, the chapter does provide a piece of data that requires explanation. Majority of human beings claim to have had experiences with God. This may not be an argument in any formal sense, but it certainly does count as evidence. And then he says, what about the ad populum fallacy? So the ad populum fallacy states that appealing to what the majority of people believe is a way of establishing truth is inadequate. After all, at one time, the majority of people thought that the Earth was the center of the universe with the sun in orbit around it. Right? They were wrong. Right? The same way that we could be wrong. However, this experience is real. Right? We know when we've had this experience with God that it's real. When someone points out the multitude of religious experiences, atheists will often demand that the person has committed this fallacy. But this isn't what we've done. Right? It's not an argument. The E is not an argument. Again, he says it. Right? And then he says, second, I'm not claiming that the multitude of individuals who claim to have had experiences with God proves that God exists. I'm presenting this fact about the world as a piece of data that requires explanation. Right? The atheist will answer it in one way, and the believer will answer it in a very different way. The question is, which is more plausible, right? Which is more reasonable, that 80% of the population to ever live on the earth, is right, and that there's a God, or that the 4% of the world's population that makes up true atheists are right. Right? Which one of these is more plausible? Right? He says, I think that of the two options, that they are all mistaken or they're genuinely interacting with something objective, the second is more plausible. Right? So it's more plausible that God exists based on the multitude of people who've claimed to have experiences with God. Now, does that mean that every experience with God is with God really, or or what? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, do these people truly believe that they've had an experience with God? And in this belief that they've had an experience with God, right, are we talking about something supernatural, right? And he says, now he talks about transitioning this for the layman. He says, when facilitators and trainers need to accomplish for students with ease, merely after hearing the arguments for C, O, and R, unbelievers should be encouraged to be open-minded to an experience of God in their own lives. Right? This will probably be one of the shortest videos I do, because it's, we're talking about, when we're discussing this with an atheist or an unbeliever, or somebody who's stuck in a cult or anything like that, or anything in that nature, right? This experience, we have to remember that it has to be measured against everything else that we see, right? It says the primary statement that believers should be instructed to make is, you can have an immediate experience of God by genuinely seeking him with an open mind today. Right? This sets us up for the remainder of the material to be discussed. Right? So once we've talked about who God is, which is what we've done in the core portion of this, right? We're ready to move on to, okay, now that we've said God exists, now which God exists? Which of the multitudes of gods out there, right? Because a lot of people have had experiences with God, quote unquote experiences with God, but don't know who Christ is, right? So now we have to, lead into the next portion, which is the big portion of this, and that'll be, the F, A, C, and T will all be, based on the resurrection of Jesus, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, which Paul tells us clearly is the heart of the gospel, right? So once we've got people to the, okay, I'm an agnostic, right? I don't know which God it is, that's when we start going into the facts part. So he says, in this chapter, I've invited individuals to be open-minded, to have an immediate experience with God. It's been made clear that this is not an argument, right? This is a personal appeal. This is our appeal to the atheists that we're having a discussion with, right? Have you considered the CO and R? Well, open your heart, try to have a personal experience with God. And once you've done that, let's talk about who God really is. And he says, we've also contemplated the fact that individuals claiming to have experienced God is a norm for the human race. There's nothing uncommon or out of step with the times about being open-minded in this regard. Ultimately, the most important message of this chapter is you can have an immediate experience of God by genuinely seeking him with an open mind. Right? So that's the heart of E. And actually, I think I read almost every word of the chapter. So do you have any questions? Did I lose it?
I don't really have a question. This is very clear, very plain. Just maybe a clarification. You said
Sure.
this E, which is experience,
Yes,
is not an argument. So
that's
you
correct.
mean,
It's a personal appeal. It's not really an argument.
okay, so I wrote it as a fact, so that was wrong.
No, it is. It's not a fact. We can pretty much state that it.
So it's a personal appeal.
Right. This is a personal appeal to
Okay.
people. Once you've presented the three facts, the C, the O, and the R.
COR are the
People,
three facts.
right
Okay.
now you're ready to go into the personal experience that appeal to them of hey, you should really think about this
Okay.
more yourself, and you should seek who God is.
Okay.
And then what you get into is the resurrection of Jesus, which is the fact part, right? We're going to talk next week about the fatality of the cross. Then we'll talk about the appearances, the commitment of the disciples, and the testimony that the disciples left us.
Okay.
And then we're
All
going to
right.
the fun part.
Pastor Mark.
So, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. You said it, the experience is not a fact. It's just a personal appeal. But for a person who really experienced God, it's a fact to that person.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It is a, well, the difference is, right, is it's a very subjective thing, right? So in the actual argument terms, it doesn't count because it's subjective. Right. We're looking for objective things when we're having a philosophical argument or discussion, right? I use argument the way that Paul used it. Means a discussion with facts put behind, right?
Okay.
So that's why. So yes, it is a subjective fact. It's a reality, right?
Because
I know that I've had an experience with God. That is a fact. Yeah. However, it's not one that I can present.
That's what I was just coming with. Yeah. So that person, I can tell you I have an experience and I know it's a fact, but you don't know that it's a fact.
Right.
Only okay, got you.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at by saying it's not a fact, as in right. By facts we're talking things that would be, say, admissible in a court of law. Okay. Right. We're trying to bring out the real evidence of it.
Because they don't see it. The eyes don't see it. The physical eyes don't see it. So it's not a fact to them because they don't see it.
And they haven't experienced it.
Right.
Right. Wow. And that's why you make that appeal to them too.
Yes.
have their own personal experience with God.
Right. Mm.
And then they would be able to share their testimony um
Yes.
to another person who has experienced God,
Yes,
to
yes,
because you
because
could
me,
share your testimony now. So say you witness, you went through the C, the O, the R, and
mhm,
then they are like, okay, all right, so I hear your three arguments, and now this God you're talking about, can I experience this God? And you're
right.
like,
And here's
yes,
how
he
you,
can be experienced. And then maybe you talk about how you experienced God. So
absolutely,
then, yeah, okay.
that's where your testimony falls in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Mm. Yes,
But
yes.
everyone has to have their own personal experience with God.
Yes, ma'am. That is 100% right.
I can't know him for you, Pastor Matt.
Mm.
Exactly. So
Okay.
nobody can have somebody else's faith. Nobody can live somebody else's faith. Is what
Mm-hmm.
that really is getting at. So,
Yes, this is really what I needed, Pastor Matt. Thank you for listening to my um, request and for doing this, because certainly this is how I learn. I am connecting
well, that's good.
totally with this.
That's good.
Before it was just floating in the clouds and I couldn't reach it. But now I definitely can understand what this is all about.
Yeah, and so this is really why I enjoy apologetics, is because I think it's graspable by pretty much everybody, but you just gotta get it to the right level. And I think that's what I think Braxton has done in this book, is he's really brought it
Mm-hmm.
to the perfect level for people to be able to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to grasp and to use. And
Mm-hmm.
somebody on Facebook, they asked, what's the best apologetics book out there, and another friend of mine, he replied that this book is the best one because it's so practical, and it's graspable by the majority of people in the church. And I would have to say I agree with it. And that came basically on the heels of your request for, hey, can you really break down how to do apologetics? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of why I chose this book.
Yes, this is 100% of my street. And some of my friends, as you were saying, the COR are the three arguments, but I did ask
Mm-hmm.
you last week, and you said there are more than those three, and
There
and
are
so forth.
there
But you,
are two more really, but
mm-hmm,
one more is popular, which is the ontological argument. The ontological argument says that because we can conceive of a God um, who is, because we can conceive of an almighty being, uh, then our conception can't be the greatest thing out there. That the greatest thing out there would then be that almighty being to exist, right? So
mm-hmm,
uh, it's from our conceptualization of who God is.
mm-hmm,
We understand that God exists.
mm-hmm,
It's not one that I've really dug down in the weeds about, um, just because I don't think it's on the same level as these three. As the
yeah,
so, but
definitely. I was just I love to kind of create acronyms and just see patterns in a lot of things.
yeah,
So when I wrote the COR, that we covered those three arguments,
mhm.
then some of my very close friends call me COR, COR. Those
Huh.
are the first three letters of my name. So I'm just like, I have that down pat. I don't have to like think in the clouds. I'm just like, okay. So we have the the first three arguments there, which is like COR, first part of
Yep.
my name. So that will help me to remember it.
Oh, good, good.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I uh, I think that I think they're the three best arguments for God's existence too. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's it's a good thing to have memorized, and
Mm-hmm.
and the thing that you're always going to refer to next is your own personal experience, because
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know well, okay, so there's a God. How do I know that he exists? Well,
Mm-hmm.
you can experience him like I did, and then you
Mm-hmm.
give your testimony, right? And
Yeah.
well, yeah, but how do you know your God is the right one? That's what we're going to talk about next.
Right. Right. Right.
So
Right. Right. I
it's
love it, Pastor
perfect.
Matt. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Me
Yes.
too.
May the Lord bless you. You're doing such a good job in this ministry in so many ways. And Rachel is doing her evangelism part out there. All of you guys are doing well. And Evangelist Trenchfield is, oh my goodness,